Welcome to 79%, the podcast where we make space for physician associate voices that are often shut down. This is a place for honest words, lived experience, and permission to speak. The views shared here are personal experiences and reflections on wider systems.
This podcast is not intended to single out or attack individuals, but to explore patterns, culture, and accountability. We're your hosts, Emma and Amanda. And just in case anyone is confused, we are physician associates, not podcasters. And if you want to find out why that's a fucking stupid thing to have to say, then keep listening. Welcome to episode 2. This episode is about the people who make up the physician associate profession and how the profession is defended and how it's treated. But this isn't about identity for its own sake. The argument is not 79% female, therefore injustice, because that would be a weak argument and it wouldn't survive scrutiny. This episode is about something more uncomfortable and more important. It's about a workforce that naturally holds very little structural power and what happens when that workforce comes under attack.
The demographic reality. According to the most recent Faculty of Physician Associates census, approximately 79% of physician associates in the UK are female. When we look at early GMC registration data, the picture becomes clearer. As of September 2025, 3,528 physician associates had voluntarily registered with the GMC ahead of mandatory regulation in December 2026. Within that group, 88% are under the age of 40. So this is a small workforce that is both young and predominantly female. Across multiple sectors, healthcare, education, social care, professions dominated by younger and predominantly female workforces tend to hold less institutional power, less representation in leadership, less influence over policy, less control over narrative. And in times of conflict, that matters.
The PA role is made up of people who, for a range of reasons, could not or did not want to follow the traditional route into medicine. And this next bit needs to be said clearly. Access to medical school is not just about intelligence or capability. It requires financial stability, time, educational opportunity, and a strong support network. Many people are excluded from that pathway. Some PAs could not afford it, some came to healthcare later in life, and some had responsibilities that made a 5 or 6 year medical degree impossible. The PA route, a 2-year postgraduate programme with intensive clinical exposure, created an alternative entry point into working in clinical medicine. Not a shortcut, but an alternative. A different pipeline into a system that frankly needed more clinicians, not necessarily doctors, but people who could perform the tasks that need doing.
So what are PAs actually trained to do? This is where the conversation often becomes distorted. Because in the current online narrative, the PA role is often dismissed, diminished, and there are now attempts to reduce it to the role of an assistant. So let's be precise. Physician associates are trained in broad generalist medicine. At graduation, they are expected to take histories, perform examinations and clinical skills, recognize and manage common conditions, identify red flags, and escalate appropriately when cases move beyond their capability or knowledge. And that last point is not a weakness. It is the foundation of safe medicine. Every clinician, including doctors, works within limits and escalates when needed. Even consultants ask each other questions. PAs are not on a progression ladder. They can become highly skilled clinicians within their role. However, they are never and were never intended to become consultants. They are trained to function safely within a team, contributing to patient care. Medicine is mostly pattern recognition, risk identification, and decision-making around common presentations. That is what PAs are trained for.
Let's discuss continuity and how this benefits patients and increases safety. This is the part that is often missed, and arguably one of the most important bits. Modern medicine is built on rotation. Doctors move through departments every few months. That system is essential for training, but it comes with a cost. Every rotation resets part of the team. Local knowledge is lost. Familiarity with systems disappears. Relationships have to be rebuilt. Physician associates do not rotate, they stay. They learn the department, not just in theory, but in practice. They understand how the service actually runs, how patients move through it, where delays happen, what tends to go wrong, and how things are managed when they do. Over time, that creates something different from formal training. It creates experience density. A PA may not have 10 years of specialty training, but they may have 10 years in the same department, seeing the same conditions, the same complications, and the same pressures, with the same senior leaders and the same nursing team, over and over again. That is not hierarchy, but it is knowledge. Continuity doesn't just help teams, it helps patients. Patients who reattend, patients whose conditions evolve, patients who don't follow expected trajectories. A clinician who has seen those patterns before in that specific environment is more likely to recognise when something is wrong, sometimes before it's obvious. That kind of recognition does not come from textbooks. It comes from repeated exposure, and that's what continuity allows.
The professional identity problem. Traditionally, doctors follow a clearly defined pathway: medical school, foundation training, specialty training, consultant. That pathway builds identity, status, and authority over time. Physician associates do not follow that pathway. They do not progress into senior medical roles, they remain PAs. Their permanence is positioned as a weakness, but that permanence within the team, the continuity, is one of their biggest strengths. The problem is this: a system that values progression, hierarchy, and seniority places little value in static knowledge accumulation. And a profession without progression, hierarchy, and seniority does not accumulate power. Therefore, it finds it very difficult to fight back when facing intentional, targeted, and manufactured attacks.
The cheap substitute narrative. One of the most persistent claims in this debate is that PAs are cheap substitutes for doctors, and also somehow more expensive, but we'll park that for the minute. Let's be clear about something. Cheap substitute is an assault. It reflects how easily a workforce can be discredited, and it raises questions. Why did that narrative stick so quickly? And would that phrase have even been used had most PAs not been young and female? Because the ease with which a profession is discredited tells you something about how little institutional protection it had to begin with.
Structural vulnerability. So, when we put all of this together, a pattern emerges. This is a workforce that is younger, predominantly female, drawn from non traditional roots, permanently embedded rather than progressing, and lacking long standing institutional representation. Think royal colleges, long standing unions, etc. The union representing the majority of physician associates, United Medical Associate Professionals, otherwise known as UMAPs, was only formed in November 2023. This was in direct response to escalating hostility. Within months, it represented a large proportion of practicing PAs, and that speed tells you something. It tells you the profession did not have time to build power before it needed to defend itself. And professions that lack institutional power do not enter conflict on equal terms. Despite those unequal terms, the formation of UMAPs tells you that this is not a profession willing to back down quickly, or willing to allow false narratives to exist.
So, why does any of this matter? This episode is not making a claim about worth based on identity, it's making a claim about structure. Physician associates were designed to support the NHS under pressure. They bring generalist medical training into teams traditionally defined by rotation, and they provide continuity where continuity is otherwise lacking. They contribute to patient care through recognition, familiarity, and knowledge established over time. But they do all of this without accumulating the kind of status, hierarchy, or institutional backing that protects professions when they are challenged. So when conflict came, they were not positioned to shape the response. They were positioned to accept their fate as defined by those attempting to hold the NHS to ransom and continue their protectionist agenda.
Today we're genuinely in for a treat. We are joined by someone who, if you've been anywhere near the PA discourse over the past few years, you'll definitely recognise as one of the standout voices. In the middle of what has often felt like chaos, confusion, and let's be honest, some pretty dark moments, this man has consistently cut through the noise. He's one of the sharpest commentators in this entire saga, thoughtful, perceptive, and crucially, very, very funny. When things have felt heavy, his words have brought clarity. When things have felt ridiculous, he somehow managed to articulate why with impressive accuracy. He's one of those rare voices where when something happens, you actually want to know what he thinks about it. And I'm genuinely excited for this conversation. So, Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on. I don't know if I can have that in writing, could I?
It's recorded already. If it helps.
There you go. It's fact now.
There we go. So, Dan, just in the conversation we were having before we started recording this, you said that you've been in healthcare for 20 years.
Yep.
Could you tell me more about that? Because I genuinely didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's almost 20 years. So I'll just give a very quick sort of CV. I did a degree in biochemistry with biomedicine back in 2005.
Yeah.
I came out and worked in phase 1 clinical trials, private company, just down the road from my parents' house. I worked there for around 8 years. Started off as a lab analyst, got into regulatory work, became a principal scientist for a couple of first-in-man clinical trials. Did a lot of systems work. It was one of those environments where you kind of just pick up whatever work needs doing. I decided I wanted to come into the NHS, so I applied to work in the laboratories in the NHS. Took a considerable pay cut to do so, but thought it was better for the long-term career to do that. Was immediately disappointed. At the end of my first week, I was told that the training that I would have been given, I wasn't going to be given, and I would stay at a band 4 role for my entire career. Okay. Because of that letdown, I thought, let's explore more clinical work, see if that's a good direction to go in. At that point, I'd worked in labs for pretty much a decade. Started working as a diabetic eye screener. Absolutely loved that job, loved the clinical environment, loved working with patients, more sort of hands-on work with them. That had a fantastic career pathway through it. And I was looking forward to spending the rest of my career there. After the first year of working there, it became privatized. They removed all of the career paths, locked us in the positions we were in unless we accepted private sector contracts, which would have resulted in pay drops for a lot of us, and was kind of feeling a bit stuck and didn't know what to do. And my then girlfriend, now wife, said that she'd applied for this physician associate course. I looked into it and I thought, well, that's one way to kind of ensure that I get a career in the clinical environment. I know for a lot of discourse online especially, they talk about it being the choice between medicine or physician associate. But for myself, that was never the choice. I never entertained medicine. The physician associate was just a way of doing more of the bits that I had done in my career up to that point that I enjoyed.
Dan, I love that. I love that it's myth busting immediately because I'm in the same camp as you. I've never considered medicine. I found the PA role and I thought it was great and did it. And it sounds similar for you.
Yeah. It was, I was at a point in my life where I kind of had to choose what I was doing and which direction I was going in. I was being enticed by a friend in Ireland into systems validation and systems management work because I'd done a lot of that in the laboratory. But I really wanted to stay in the NHS, even with the two things that had happened to me in previous roles. I think that working in the NHS is genuinely something to be proud of because every day you go into work, your focus is always on the patients and their care in front of you rather than anything else. And that's really important to me that I go to work and feel good about what I'm doing.
Yeah. Do you feel good about what you're doing at the moment?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I know that there's a lot of physician associates who are taking the approach of sort of burying their head in the sand with all of the external events going on with the role. And I completely understand that. I probably do an element of that myself. I think it's important to contextualize everything. And while there is a lot going on externally with the role, and it is very important, I think often we lose sight of what we're doing on the ground, and all it takes is one patient to say, "I'd like to see you again," and you know that you're doing something very good then. Or an investigation into an event comes back and finds that you were the one who did everything right, and I think it's important to hold on to those kind of events. I know certainly in my workplace, um, as I've sort of continued to work in the community, that's happened more and more, and it's quite good to kind of focus on that.
Yeah. And Dan, sorry, just for clarity for listeners, where do you work? Primary or secondary care?
I work in primary care in rural West Wales.
Excellent, fantastic. Okay, Dan, so given everything you've just said, do you think that you would make the same decision again to follow the PA pathway, given everything that's happened, if you knew that was going to happen in the first place?
It's a difficult question to answer because I think it really depends on the role that you've ended up in and how the environment you're in is. I'm really, really lucky because I work in a GP practice that struggles massively to get GP locums in. It is entirely GP locum staffed. And most days there are at least one or two locums down, simply because there aren't enough GPs in rural areas.
Yeah.
For that reason, I feel my value to the surgery, and I think that my job is fairly secure at the moment anyway. And I don't have to deal with a lot of the kind of bullying, harassment, and ill treatment that I've heard of other PAs experiencing elsewhere. So if I knew I was going into the job that I'm in now, I would do it all over again. If I had to take the lottery of where am I going to end up working and what are my colleagues going to be like, I think I would struggle to make that decision then. And I think that kind of talks to what this experience is like. And something I think the NHS is really missing on this is that there's a lot of talk about burnout and stress within the workplace. And you've got an entire group of professionals where that's sort of, the telephone calls coming from the inside of the house and nothing's being done about it.
It's interesting to me that you are working with a lot of locums. Do you find the locums are often quite receptive to you and your role given where you are, or do you feel hostility from them?
So we've got one salary GP now, and we previously had a clinical lead who was salaried. They have a lot more understanding because there's a lot more back and forth. Locums are almost like mercenaries. They just come in to do their job. They don't seem to really care who else is in the surgery. I guess it's probably different in other areas of the country where there's more competition for locums. They may feel a bit more aggrieved that there's a physician associate that dares to take a position that a GP locum could do. But in my area, because everywhere is so short-staffed with such a small pool of GPs, I really haven't had any hostility from any of them. They've mostly been quite receptive. One or two of them have mentioned, is particularly if they're on the on-call shift, that all of the patients on my list would be on theirs if I wasn't there. So,
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think again, it depends on where you are and what the local environment's like. We see a lot of news about physician associates and a lot of events, which I feel, having worked in rural healthcare, are much more city focused. The idea that GPs can't get jobs. Well, I work in an area where we're desperate for them, absolutely crying out for them. And they get too many locum offers and they have to pick and choose which ones they're doing. So, I really think it depends on where you are.
Sorry, Dan, I just wanted to take you back to after your introduction where you said, did you say your wife is a PA?
No, she applied for a PA course, but was unsuccessful, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's actually really hard to get into, isn't it? So I just want to, can you imagine what life would be like if your wife was a PA and you was a PA? Do you think you would find this whole situation slightly more stressful if you were both working as PAs? Because obviously the climate, the way things are at the minute, there's a lot of stress.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, actually. Yeah, I guess you would. I mean, I was speaking to my father yesterday because I took my car to the garage and they've said it's a write-off, so I have to buy a new car. And if you were in a role that wasn't under a national guillotine, you would probably take out an extended car loan and get a decent car. Whereas I'm in the position of saying, right, do I do that and risk in the future that I might not have a job, or do I take out a smaller loan and get a car that's not going to last me as long? So these are these are kind of considerations that my wife doesn't have to make because she's in a more secure role. And I was trying to explain to my father that the problem with having your entire role and your entire professional identity under a guillotine is that it colors every decision you make in your life. We purposefully got a mortgage that was very, very small because, again, my role is under a guillotine. So it does color every single decision you make. And I think if my wife was also a physician associate, that stress and that kind of difficulty in making financial decisions would be twicefold, and would probably become an impossible situation.
Oh, Dan.
Yeah, like for me, so my husband isn't a physician associate, but I still feel that stress. And we speak to a lot of PAs who've recently just taken a mortgage out, and struggle with that side of things now. And these are ones whose jobs are on the line, really. It must be an awful situation when you're so dependent. We've got people so dependent on you financially for security, and then you don't know where your job lies.
Yeah, and also, from the sort of union representation work I've done, it made me realize just how quickly that can happen as well. None of the people who were being made redundant had any inkling. Well, the vast majority of people that I represented, it just came out of the blue. So you can kind of think that you're in a pretty safe position, and then all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah.
And with there being no jobs in the UK, if you lose your current job, that's it. You got nothing to go to. It's a really tough spot to be in.
Yeah, but Dan, I think it happened like that with the PAs because the guidance has come out. It's not that they were working poorly in the first place. It's not that they were on. I mean, it's a redundancy. It wasn't a performance plan. So they hadn't been dangerous in some way, and they were on their third warning. It's
That's
just
right.
that the BMA guidance has come out, or the RCGP guidance has come out, or the Leng review has come out, and that slowly eroded the confidence, I suppose, that employers have in people who have worked safely under them for years, and they've just gone, actually, I just don't like the risk of the kind of national picture or the reputation of having a PA in my practice. And then they've got rid of them, not through genuine processes either. It's just, you will know this from the union work as well. It's just, they make up any excuse to say, okay, now we can't keep them. We can't keep you out of all of the staff. No one else is being made redundant. It's just the PAs, but still, it's you we're getting rid of.
Yeah, I mean, I lost track of the number of GPs that said, we don't want to do this. This person's been here for a long time. They're working well. We've got no concerns with them. But these new restrictions have come out, and now they can't do the job that they've been doing well for years. And it's not just physician associates that are affected by that. I mean, we know that from the news pretty much every day that one of the largest problems in healthcare in this country at the moment is access. And you're restricting a group of professionals who are providing access for reasons that don't sort of fit evidential scrutiny. Yeah, it's an odd position to be in, that we are purposefully harming patients and harming professionals. And what for? What are we doing it for? I think for the anti-PA movement within the doctoring profession, I wouldn't want to say that there's a singular kind of reason or cause for them. They're all different people who've united around one idea. There's no doubt in my mind that there are probably some doctors who honestly believe we're unsafe. I would say that if you surveyed doctors on whether they thought statins were unsafe, you'd probably find that there's enough of them that you'd want to ban statins in this country. But we use quantifiable evidence to determine whether drugs are safe. But for people in the NHS, we don't use evidence; we use surveys. So I think there are probably doctors who think that we are unsafe, but I think that's a minority. I mean, if you look at the social media discourse around this, it's rooted entirely in elitism and protectionism. Nothing more than that. The dehumanizing language that they're using to describe physician associates is evidence itself that this isn't anything to do with patient safety. It's all to do with sticking one to us. And sort of maintaining the elitist model of only doctors can do what doctors do. And we've seen that actually changing that and having more members of medical teams chipping in with work is good for patients, it's good for access, it's good for quality of care, allowing doctors to do the things that only they can do with their training, and allowing other members of the MDT to chip in is good for everyone. But it's not good if you want to maintain this idea that only doctors can do everything that doctors are currently doing. One of the things that's become apparent from this, and I think is something which the general public and the media in particular still see doctors as all these incredibly altruistic, professional people with really good intentions, and I think the majority of doctors are that. I got nothing but respect for good doctors, but what social media has done is it's allowed the bad doctors to have a megaphone, and I think the doctoring profession allows people to really work at their absolute best and be a real asset to them and the people around them. But the floor is much lower than I thought it was in terms of the harm that it allows people to do. And you see the language that some of these doctors are using online, and the kind of, there's no other word for it than stupidity of some of the doctors online in terms of their misunderstanding of how the world works. I mean, there was one doctor who was actually in a newspaper article saying I can't get a training job after F2 because of PAs. And there was no kind of pushback on that of, well, how does that work? Because we can't apply for training jobs. So how are we taking that job? And it's just allowing them to say these things, but because they're doctors, they go in unchallenged, unanswered. They have the majority within the medical space to push whatever agenda they want. And when you ask me if I would, work in healthcare, knowing everything that's going on, I'm not disappointed with the role, and I'm not disappointed with what we do, and I'm not really disappointed with doctoring as a profession. I'm disappointed with what I've seen behind the curtain in terms of what they're capable of doing and what they're allowed to do.
But it's so true, isn't it? The mask has slipped massively, and it's really disappointing to see what some in that profession have come out with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been to the whistleblowing services in South Wales for bullying. Only one incident to myself. It's mostly happening to other physician associates, but they couldn't believe the things they were seeing. And one of the workforce advisors that I was speaking to about this said, I can't believe these are doctors saying these things online. And when I went to the GMC and I said, do you know how doctors are circumventing your social media guidance? It's because they're saying they're not doctors online. They're not doctors, but then they're talking in language that only doctors would talk in and about things only doctors would talk about. So they're really, you're seeing the kind of the toxic effects of social media in general, and that doctors are not immune to it at all.
That's so true. Yeah.
Dan, can I ask a question? Just to take you back to where you said about you think some doctors genuinely think we're unsafe.
Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from? Do you think that comes from experience of working with PAs, or do you think it comes from the opinions of others, and some of these people are very easily influenced? And then also, second part to that question, what impact do you think that has on patients?
I think that, again, it's probably multifactorial. I suspect, as a profession, as any other profession, there are going to be good and bad PAs. And because there's so few of us and we're so geographically spread, it's likely that if one doctor meets a bad PA, whether they'll meet another PA who's good, and that one experience will color their perception. And doctoring is an evidence-based profession, so you would hope if they meet one bad PA, they wouldn't base their opinion on the whole profession on that. They would look into it a little bit more. So there may be an element of that there. We saw with the RCGP survey that was sent out to GPs, asking them for their experiences of PAs, a huge number of respondents had never met a PA but had an opinion on us. And I think this is something that's not just for doctors, but for pretty much all people, particularly in the social media age. And I know I'm going off on social media quite a bit, is that everybody has an opinion on everything. And, I'm very much, as I've said here, kind of, I don't want to say that this is my opinion on why doctors are doing this, because I don't know. I can speculate a little bit, but a lot of people will say this is my opinion and this is what I believe, and have no backing of it. And that survey kind of accents the point, that if you haven't met a PA and all you can see is the negative stories about them online and the lies and the all of this, then your opinion on them is going to be colored that way. And then that opinion feeds into a survey that is used to determine what PAs can and can't do. So you've got this almost negative feedback cycle that just results in PAs having restrictions placed on them.
Yeah. But
I get that. Dan, sorry, Amanda, I just wanted to ask one more question just based on what you've said about the surveys.
Yep.
Did you come across the GP who put a post. I know we said we shouldn't look on social media, but obviously we do. Probably not so much now than we compared to what we used to. But there was a GP, wasn't there, who put a post on Twitter saying something like how to please a woman in bed, and she was coaching her GP husband on how to fill in an anti-PA survey. Do you remember that? And just like, if you do, what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in a really weird position. I know I brought up sort of drug trials before, but we don't base our safety of drugs on the opinions of doctors through a survey online. But for staff who've been working in the NHS for 20 years, and we have all of this quantifiable data, and we have a couple of studies into what we do, we're using anonymous surveys online of doctors. It's an incredibly poor way of collecting good quality information, and the example you've given is exactly why. The BMA and the anti-physician associate groups online are schooling people in how to complete these surveys to cause maximum damage. People who've never met a physician associate will see through all of their social media that physician associates are bad, and then they will go on to complete a survey. These surveys are useless. In all these surveys don't say whether or not physician associates are safe. These surveys are saying, what do doctors think of physician associates? And I would go one further and say, what do doctors who care about the situation think about PAs? Because a lot of the surveys have got around or less than 10% response rate. If 90% of doctors in this country can't be bothered to fill out a 2-minute survey on something, it's probably not important to the vast majority of doctors. I mean, they just want to go with the flow and do their job. Not many of them care about us in a positive or negative way. And because of that, the negative ones are able to push through what they're doing because they are sending these surveys out to their friends and saying, complete these surveys. And there's a political kind of there's a political idea called flood the zone, where you push out so much stuff that everything else gets silenced, and that's exactly what they're doing. And these surveys are the same thing. I mean, there was one survey of surgical trainees where I think the numbers don't these numbers are not exact, but around about tens of thousands of surgical trainees said that physician associates had severely impacted their training as surgical trainees. And there was less than 300 physician associates working in surgery across the entirety of the UK at the time. But then that survey is taken as, right, this is gospel, this is evidence. It's just really, really poor quality evidence that is being held up as
fact.
This is how it is. And that, I mean, I remember that Twitter post, and I remember thinking, well, firstly, that's a bit sad. Even though it is tongue in cheek, it's still a little bit sad. But I also remember going, well, to the people who are taking that survey and generating data from it, how can you say that that's good quality data when this is the rubbish that's happening with it?
Yeah, that's a good point, Dan. And just for the benefit of listeners, today's date is the 28th of March, 2026. And I just wanted to mention there's actually a new survey just gone out, hasn't there? The last couple of days. I think, is it from the GMC or DHSC or something?
The
like
consultation on our name.
Yeah. So do we run the risk of the exact same thing happening with this survey? I've not looked at it myself, and to be fair, it might ask for some GMC number or some kind of qualifier. But if it doesn't, is it
so
not?
This is a public consultation. This is a public consultation, so any member of the public can answer this. And I've already heard on the grapevine that the BMA is preparing a guide for its members to fill it in to maximise the damage to physician associates. So
they absolutely are. I saw that yesterday.
This public consultation has to be done by law, so this isn't an attempt to generate more evidence. This is just something that has to happen. But again, the entire future of the physician associate profession rests on the opinions of doctors who can be bothered to fill out a survey. Why are we not looking at morbidity and mortality rates of departments and GP surgeries that hire physician associates? If you looked at morbidity and mortality of each hospital and each GP surgery before and after they hire physician associates for everywhere in the country, you can see if there's a trend. And if there is, great, we're unsafe. you got the evidence. But instead, we're just saying, can you be bothered to fill in the survey about PAs, of which the majority of doctors will go, well, I don't care, I'm not going to fill it in. The ones who are positive to us will go, yeah, I'll fill in positive. And the ones who are negative will post it all over social media, because the positive ones will post it on social media because they'll get harassed about it and they'll be sent death threats by other doctors.
Yeah. So, guys, should we just see what the Lang review said about this? So, from the forward or executive framing of the report, it says the data provided a patchy overview and significant gaps. Now is not the time to defer to the wisdom of future research. Instead, I have viewed the evidence in the context of wider considerations, including the perspective of patients and clinicians. So what she's saying is there's no data, so we'll just go on the opinion of patients and clinicians. And as you say, if that's all influenced by social media campaigns and who has the biggest megaphone, then it's obvious what's going to happen, isn't it?
Well, again, you could do a review of statins with the same evidentiary standard, and you would have to ban statins in the UK.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I come from an almost decade-long career in a highly regulated, highly quantifiable environment. First in man drug testing, where evidence is key, and we were never asked within clinical trials, what do you think of this drug? It was always, what do the results say about this drug? And I can't believe that we're providing a harder evidentiary standard to chemicals than we are people. It's just ridiculous. So yeah, and again, these surveys, who are they sent to? So the surveys are sent to RCGP members, they're sent to BMA members. You're pre-selecting a population for these surveys anyway. And I had a look at some of these surveys, and the surveys are quite biased in the way that they ask questions as well. It's just, if you wanted to engineer a narrative that physician associates need to be got rid of, they've done it perfectly. And this is the one thing I'm going to pat the anti-PA campaign on the back for, is that they've done things perfectly to get us to the position that they're in. I'm not sure it's enough to get what they want over the line. And this comes to the Lang review, because the Lang review, it's incredibly clear from the recommendations she's made that the Lang review is a compromise. The Lang review is to placate the doctors who are conflating issues like pay with the presence of physician associates in the National Health Service. It's to try and placate them while also not getting rid of us. And the problem with the compromise is no one's happy. So the doctors feel that the Lang review hasn't gone far enough because they wanted to get rid of physician associates from the UK. And for us physician associates, it severely restricts what we do. It removes what we were trained to do, 2 years of training in diagnosis and management of conditions, and then we can't diagnose or manage conditions. It's a compromise. And the problem with the compromise is that no one is happy with it. And Lang will be getting heat from both sides on this. But the side from doctors is about harming other people and pushing another profession to the brink of extinction. And our concerns are more, we would like to continue what we're doing and providing patients with safe and effective care.
Yeah, Dan, I agree with you that it's the worst of both worlds, but I think it's also clever in where it leaves us, because I think that PAs will be depressed by the entire situation. I like working in the NHS. I'm certainly proud of what we do as a profession, but I am not willing to put up with this for the rest of my life, to forever be apologising for my existence within the NHS and trying to do my best. People will get to a point where they go, sod this, I'm just going to have a happier life. I can exit this situation and be gone. And I think if you degrade our role to such an extent, it's like constructive dismissal on a mass scale, isn't it? So people will just become so fed up of all of it that they then won't have to pay redundancies or packages for us to retrain. I don't think they expected the legal challenge that they've got.
No,
I
agree
imagine
on that, absolutely.
yeah, I imagine they would have expected a legal challenge had they said, we are abolishing this role. There must have been something that said, okay, we're abolishing this role. What are we going to do with these 3,500 up to 5,000 people who have already trained as PAs? We're going to have to put something in place for them. Whereas if you put this grey, wishy-washy rubbish out there, people will eventually just leave, won't they?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they expect the legal challenge. I think you're absolutely right on that. I don't think they expect. The problem is that when all of this started in late 2023, a lot of physician associates took the approach of, I'm okay, so I'm not going to rock the boat.
Yeah.
And some physician associates, myself included, took the approach of, we just need to have doctors understand our role and all of this will go away. We didn't quite appreciate the level of malevolence at that point in time.
Yeah.
Now it's become clear that this is just a elitist sort of campaign. Um, a lot of physician associates are still burying their head in the sand, and I think that meekness is why, as you said, the government thought they could do this without pushback. I think that the meekness has permeated through to a reputation on the entire profession. And I was just speaking to my colleague Alex the other day because he tried to refer a patient into same day emergency care for suspected appendicitis, and they wouldn't do it unless he discussed it with a GP first. And what he was going to do about that was have a moan and do nothing. And I said, no, we've got, like, what other profession would stand for that? What other profession would say, well, that's just the way it goes? We need to do more. We need to stand up for ourselves. I had a situation where there was a dermatologist refusing my referrals. We had a dermatology service at the time where you could send pictures, and they would advise if you needed advice. And this was a patient that I'd referred to that dermatology service. They had advised a referral to the local dermatology service. I'd done the referral and it was rejected because it hadn't been discussed with a GP. So the dermatologist hadn't even read it. He just saw it came from a PA. I don't think he expected me to date exit, do a whistleblowing bullying campaign and get the primary care directorate on board to say, this man is stopping me doing my job and is causing delays in patient care. The end result of all that, firstly, was the Datex department told me it was my fault and I shouldn't be doing referrals. So I referred them to the primary care directorate.
Wow.
The end result of all of it is that dermatologist now accepts referrals from PAs, begrudgingly, but does it. So I think we've all got to stop being so meek and realize that there are mechanisms within the NHS and within employment that can help us stand up for ourselves. And just doing it on a small scale means that all of these little impediments to our role and restrictions get blown out of the way before they grow into a bigger problem. And it doesn't fix the national problem and the problem with the government, but it fixes local problems a lot. And I think PAs really need to stop being so meek and to appreciate that you are appreciated in your workplace. You are doing very good work. And if somebody is stopping you doing your good work, the only people who are going to suffer are patients. And it's your duty to ensure that that is resolved, you know?
Yeah, Dan, and I imagine you've got the entire listenership applauding. Very well done, very well said.
Can I just come in and say something there? Like, sorry about the background noise, but I think it's really important as professionals that we advocate for ourselves. And I am a firm believer that if you can't advocate for yourself, how are you going to appropriately advocate for a patient?
Yes.
Against, against something that's maybe somebody else that's contradicting your view or anything like that. Like, how can you advocate for a patient if you can't advocate for yourself? That's what I can't get on board with. It doesn't matter how old you are, how inexperienced you are. You've got to be an advocate when you work within healthcare, and you've got so much responsibility. But I do also think, we should be supporting each other. We should be advocating for each other as well. Not everyone's that confident, but you've got to find it somewhere, and you've got to take the personal aspect out of it.
I think if there's anybody listening to this who's in this position and they're feeling a little bit meek, and they're afraid of rocking the boat or raising issues, the first thing you need to do, and this is from somebody who's worked in many different jobs. I've worked on fishing boats, I've worked in factories, I've done loads and loads of different jobs. If you're ever going to cause a problem, find someone to be on your side, find a tag team partner. Okay, so when I had this issue with the dermatologist, the first thing I did is I went to the primary care directorate, so the director of primary care for the health board, and I said, do you want me doing my job or not? And they said, yeah, we want you doing your job. I said, you need to help me then. Right, great, they're on board. If it's in the hospital, you find one of the consultants who's friendly to you and you say, do you want me continuing to work with you? Do you want me doing my job? Yep, great. Could you join me as a partner in helping me out on this? I think as physician associates, we often feel very alone because there's no other physician associates around, because we are still a very small profession. But that doesn't mean that you can't find allies and people to help you out around you. And if you are feeling vulnerable in that way, I think just find somebody to help bolster you a little bit, and you will find somebody. There, we all get on well with some of our colleagues and some of our supervisors. at the end of the day, if you frame this not as you moaning and not as you rocking the boat, but on you losing the ability to do the job you've been hired to do, you'll find most workplaces will rectify it through that lens.
This is 79%. Thank you for listening.